Okay, so hi, I'm Caroline.
Hi, I'm Miracle.
And then our other group member was Stephanie, and she wasn't able to be here today, but we're going to be discussing the PERIE project with you guys. So, the burden of the disease and condition. So, for our objective, we decided to focus on reducing the percentage of adults who are considered obese, and Healthy People 2020 defined adults as anyone 20 years or older. So if we look at the burden of disease or the condition, the morbidity rates, there are 33.9% of adults over the age of 20 that are considered obese. This number is about 93 million people in the United States. And then non Hispanic black people were the most at risk group, with 47% of this population considered obese. So, mortality rates, obesity causes around 18% of deaths in the United States each year, and then it can also lead to other diseases such as heart disease, which this kills around 600,000 people in the US yearly. And then obesity can also take 4 to 7 years off of a person's life. So, changes in these rates, unfortunately, both of the rates are increasing. The mortality rates caused by obesity have increased around 3 times compared to previous years. And then the morbidity rates are also continuing to increase, especially in children. So, the course of the disease or the condition. So, obesity is defined by anyone who has a BMI index of above 30 kilograms. So, BMI is the body mass index. The disease does progress within individuals, and it causes behavioral mechanisms such as sleep loss or stress. But then genetics also play a strong role in the biological mechanisms of obesity. So, weight gain is actually one of the number one causes that causes the progression of obesity to occur. And so, when a person does have weight gain, it causes hormonal changes, and then also the body begins to store food as fat, and a person's appetite begins to change. So, this leads to them thinking that they are hungry all the time, which leads to overeating. So, continuing with the course of the disease, the disease also progresses within populations. Since the 1980s, obesity has increased in all populations. The prevalence rate of obesity is higher in low income and low education populations. So, if we look at the most recent stats, 44.2% of populations with just a high school degree were considered obese, and then around 30% of college graduates were considered obese. So you can see that the more educated population did have a lower prevalence rate of obesity. Then, if we look at specific populations, 48% of African Americans were considered obese, compared to 37% of whites who were considered obese, and around 45% of Hispanics who were considered obese. So, when we look at defining the at risk population, there are socio-demographic determinants and potential mechanisms that play into this. So, looking at the first one, it would be poverty, because the cheapest food available is fast food. So, people who do live in poverty tend to be able to afford fast food, which would, of course, increase their risk of becoming obese. And then looking at specific populations, the population of people 500% above the poverty line, only 31% of this population was considered obese, compared to the population under the poverty line, 42% of this population was obese. So, specifically comparing these two rates, the people under the poverty line had around a 35% more of a chance of being at risk for obesity. High school education also plays a role in the at risk factor. So, a lack of income from not being able to secure a job would, of course, play into being more at risk for obesity because, again, that plays into the poverty where the cheapest food available is fast food. Then, if we look at specific statistics, the population with only a high school degree, around 44% of this population was considered obese, compared to the population with a college degree, only around 30% of this population was obese. And then again, comparing these two statistics, the population with just a high school degree had a 48.8% more of a chance of being at risk for obesity.
So there are three potential interventions on combating obesity. The first one was that we chose was education on a healthy diet. This type of intervention is primary because it's before the onset of obesity. We would target the target population for this intervention would be the community, particularly in a low income area. Our approach would be education, like educating people on what a healthy diet consists of, um, how to be able to afford a healthy diet, things like that. An advantage to this is that they would be more likely to eat healthier food. A disadvantage is that this particular intervention excludes social determinants, which could prevent a healthy diet, such as income. So, our second intervention was participation in physical activity. This type of intervention is known as primary because, again, it's before the onset of obesity. Again, we would target our at risk community. Our approach to this would be education, like on the type of exercises that you're able to do, motivating them, like encouraging them to keep up um, physical activity and exercising. And an advantage to this, of course, would be to lower the risk for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, all the biological aspects of obesity. A disadvantage would be a risk of injury, which we can combat through education and an unsafe place to exercise. Low income communities usually are not the best, are usually not the safest areas to be outdoors or doing anything. But of course, that also has a solution to it as well. So our third intervention was maintaining a healthy weight because, as stated previously, weight gain was the primary cause to obesity. And so this type of intervention, again, would be primary because it's prior to the onset of the disease. Our target population wouldn't be the community, it would be more of like an individual, one-on-one, how you can stay within a healthy range of weight. So an advantage of this would be they would have more energy because they have a healthier weight, and it prevents diseases such as heart disease, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. A disadvantage of this would be the lack of resources to maintain a healthy diet, um, which leads into a healthy weight, and the misconstructed idea of how to obtain and maintain a healthy weight. Um, because not everyone's healthy weight is the same. It really does depend on the individual. And so this intervention was primary. And yes. So our evidence-based recommendation, basically we're just evaluating how effective each of our interventions were. So education on a healthy diet, it's not as effective. People respond to different marketing techniques. People with low educational levels are not likely to change their eating habits due to an educational campaign. Like we said earlier, there are social determinants affecting this recommendation, and so we said that it was not as effective. Maintaining a healthy weight, this one again is not as effective. Like we said, it really does depend on person to person. People can misunderstand what it means to have a healthy weight. High/moderate fat diets do not provide more weight loss. High proteins had short-term advantages. So these are just basically like those misconstructed ideas of what it means to maintain a healthy weight and what it means to have a healthy weight. And both of these were not as effective because um, of social determinants, and there really wasn't a way to combat that. So the one that we decided to go with was physical activity. We decided that this one would be the most effective because compared to other interventions, this one had the most success. Direct correlation, physical activity had a direct correlation to decreased risk for disease and deaths. It was greater than a 50% correlation, so that's really good. A study of 330 women were considered obese. Physical activity found to be effective in decreased body fat. Physical activity group had an overall decrease in body weight, and the control group had no decrease in body weight. So physical activity is really the best way to combat obesity. It's also easy to track and measure and to see if this intervention, if the implementation of this intervention is really effective, and you can see a benefit within a short amount of time. So continued, there's numerous benefits. Like stated earlier, it's decreased for disease and mortality. A disadvantage, of course, were those social determinants, like it might not be a safe place for them to exercise. However, you can exercise at home, and there are programs like the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA that provide a safe place for you to exercise and etc.
Okay, so the implementation aspect of our intervention. So, our target population would be adults who are 20 years and older, and then more specifically, it would be the African American population because they did have the highest obesity rates. So, how would our intervention be conducted? We would use different techniques such as informing the participants on how to properly do physical activity and also motivating our participants to do this physical activity. The implementation of our exercise program consists of several steps. The first step would be an intro meeting where we would just explain to the participants what our program consists of. Then the second meeting would just be the people or the participants who want to participate in our exercise program. Those participants then would receive daily emails in order to motivate them to complete their physical activity. They would also attend weekly meetings, and attendance to these meetings would be highly suggested. We would bring food, healthy of course, and also gifts to kind of boost attendance. Then the participants would also receive the physical activities that they would be completing for that week. We would also have check-in days where each person in our program would be evaluated on the physical activity that they are completing, and we would hope that these check-in days would serve as a motivational aspect of our intervention to keep the participants active and to hold them accountable to make sure they are doing their physical activity.
Okay. So before intervention, we would determine the risk for obesity. Our intervention would last about 15 weeks. So after 15 weeks, we would evaluate the effectiveness by analyzing how many adults have increased their participation in exercise/physical activity, which is a primary, like stated earlier, this is a primary intervention, so we're preventing obesity from occurring. And so we would do this via a stratified surveying system. Depending on the results, we'll we'll change it like depending on the results, but we can identify the extent the intervention was adopted and how effective it was. And after the 15 week after the end of 15 weeks, we can follow up and hopefully they continue this intervention throughout their lives instead of straying from it. So, how we determined our evaluation was through a resource by the NCBI, which is Evaluating Obesity Prevention Efforts. So, these are some of the things that we based our evaluation upon, which is common themes and determining status of the target population, such as social status, ethnicity, etc., tracking changes in the target population, determining if programs and our policies are causing beneficial changes in our target population, and simply determining if the intervention was effective through the use of these points.
So on the next two slides are just our references that we used to come up with our points for this project. So I would definitely recommend looking through the references if you are interested or have other questions about our topic.